Carol, that was a beautiful eulogy. Thank you so much. Glamour magazine recently asked 19-year-old country and pop star Taylor Swift, what kind of life do you picture 10, 20 years from now? Taylor Swift replied, I hope I'm still touring, but I'm not the kind of person who will hang around if I become irrelevant. I'll bow out gracefully, raise my kids, and have a garden. Well, I love Taylor Swift's funk, and quite frankly, her music. But for her, having a garden and raising kids is just theory. And it might be hard for her to leave the fame that she's enjoying now and really be able to do that. But for Camilla Pahl, raising kids and growing gardens is not theory. It is a legacy. A legacy which she was good at. You know, you heard Lynn say in the biography that she aspired at one time in her life to be an actress. When she was married, after she was married, she never worked a job in her life and never sought any kind of a career. Her kids were all her life. I calculated this morning roughly, she prepared about 300,000 meals. And I didn't try and figure the square footage of the laundry. And somehow we always had that meal of meat and potatoes and a vegetable. And we didn't do it family style. Your portion was always put in front of you, and that's what you were supposed to eat. And Mom wasn't a gourmet cook, but it was solid, good food. And I was reminded as we, brothers and sisters, were going through this stuff in our apartment the other day, that Camilla means self-sacrificing. And Camilla slaved so that we could be the beneficiaries of the upbringing that she gave us. I was in this chapel 2 weeks ago for the funeral service of Arthur Mortensen, who lives a stone's throw from here, used to in 81 Lonsdale, where he raised 7 beautiful kids. Just like Mom lives a stone's throw from here at 248 Wellington and raised 8 beautiful kids. And I remember when my best friend Michael Ballantyne told me 30 years ago that Arthur Mortensen, after he'd work his 8-hour job at the drill press, would leave and go to a second job where they let him come a little bit late every day, and he'd work another 8-hour shift. And he did that for over 30 years so he could support those 7 kids. And his mother, who paid her respect, his daughter Linda, who paid her respects here yesterday, reminded me that Dadzo, as they called him, also did that on Saturdays. And so, you know, Tom Brokaw calls them that, you know, the best generation or whatever. What's in it for Arthur Mortensen for 16 hours to be at a drill press and Mom to be 300,000 meals? What's in it for them? You know, Camilla means self-sacrificing. And they did it so their families could have a better life. And I remember I went to the meal that they had after they had the funeral service, and I'm mentioning that because we're going to have a meal today, which you're all welcome to after the service, and all the praise that the kids gave him, because the one day that Dadzo had on Sundays, he gave to the kids, take them to the zoo, take them to the park. He loved nature, and so I want you to all be thinking of a story about Camilla or something you can share, because we hope to have a little open mic type thing where people can talk about Mom. I've recounted a number of times that when I would be coming home from school sick, or some days I would be sick, and the thing that I looked most forward to is I knew Mom was going to be home, that Mom was my help, and she was. I'd come home and Mom would be there, and I used to beg her to stay in the room with me, and just because I felt better, Mom, don't leave the room. And so again, Camilla means self-sacrificing. In my work as a teacher, I work very hard intellectually, preparing lectures, preparing PowerPoint slides, grading papers, and it's a nice retreat for me during the summer to be able to garden. And with Carol, I learned how to garden from my mother. I still remember the day at 270 Victoria Lane where we walked out the side door onto the concrete stoop of the little sidewalk there, and she taught me how to plant a garden. I'll never forget. She took the spade and put it into the ground, and she and I planted carrots that day, and it was such a joy for me as a little boy to watch those carrots grow. And when we drove by 248 Wellington yesterday, I noticed 40 years ago I planted with her a red jade crab tree on the corner of that house. And I remember her telling me, this is a dwarf tree, Larry, and it's an ornamental tree. It's not going to be a big crabapple tree. And I couldn't believe how big that tree had become. It's on the corner of the house of that red jade crab that she and I planted 40 years ago. So I've enjoyed, put a pond in this summer at the house. Some of you have seen the pond I have in the backyard. I really enjoy gardening, and I thank my mother for that. You know, the fifth commandment is honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And as Lynn said, she loved her dad, she loved her mom, she spoke highly of them, and even though her dad was strict, she still saw the good in him, to praise him all the time. When I talked with the staff, some staff I'd never even met at the Devonshire, just because we tended to go in the evening, and these were staff that saw Mom during the day, they all talked about her respect for her father. And even her husband Jack, the way she talked about him in glowing terms and say what a good man he was. And so I think Camilla sets an example for all of us there, to always see the best in the other person and speak highly of them, because we can always find faults and foibles, but Mom spoke highly of her parents and her husband. You know, I thought if she lived in a different era, instead of John and Kate plus 8, it would be Jack and Camilla plus 8. And, you know, but I read the talk that her father gave at his retirement dinner after being 38 years the director of New York State Ranger School, and he said, looking back at all the students he had, and every year it meant more to him, he said that he wouldn't sell it for anything. And so when they would have put the contract in front of Camilla about, you know, Jack and Camilla plus 8, she would have said no, because it would have taken her, she wouldn't have been home, she would have been off giving interviews and things. And but yesterday, Marcia grabbed me, you know how this room was full with people, and so I was in the midst of a talk with someone, she grabs me and says, you got to meet 2 people, and she takes me over here, and here there happened to be a funeral next door while we were in here, that Marcia and I both knew the person. He was from our class right next door, and so 2 people from Marcia's past were over here. Here was Bruce Warner and Bob Rizzuto. And Marcia, I swear I had a deja vu when you brought me over, and there they were. I can't remember if I was sneaking through a window or because I was your younger brother, I was allowed to be there, but I remember, I think Bruce Warner was your first date. I remember his dad's car back there, he had the corsage, and Marcia's coming out, and the same thing with Bob Rizzuto. I remember he had a trench coat on, he had the corsage, and that's when I saw those 2 standing there. That's what I thought of, for whatever reason. It was like being brought to that moment, and so I thought, you know, I would have, maybe the world should have seen that. And then I got to thinking, yeah, all the things the world would have been able to see if we would have had Jack and Camilla plus 8. Like Mary, let's look at your, Mary, the tantrums. Oh my goodness. The world should have seen this. Mary
turning blue.
Would turn blue. She'd kick and yell and scream when she didn't get it right, and until her face would turn blue. And John reminded me this morning she'd often pass out from it, and when she came back to, she'd continue right from where she was. And then the world should have seen that, and then they should have seen the deadpan of Tom. He'd be sitting there with Dave, they'd be watching Mary had the tantrum, they're so used to it, and after, you know, 20 minutes, Tom would look over and Dave and say, she's kind of hyper, Dave. And, you know, Dave was the life of the party, the world wouldn't have had that, and of course, if we would have had Jack and Camilla plus 8, then America would have had its Princess Di, because Carol was such a sweet, cute girl, and Barb, you know, Dad said you were the prettiest girl. I remember you were so laid back, you were like still 15 months, you weren't walking, you were just content to be a baby, just doing nothing. Finally, so Marcia and I just took it upon ourselves. You're walking, we just started taking it and made you walk. So, and then John, oh my goodness, you know, Mom would talk about coming into a room and every appliance would be plugged in, the exit was gone, and then he used to ride on the vacuum cleaner when Mom would be vacuuming. And with me, the world should have seen, you know, Jack and Camilla plus 8, the way I'd have my Tinker Toy set, my blocks, about 16, and I'd have the whole living room filled with some, you know, major construction. So maybe Mom should have signed. You know, I teach my students in world history that Confucius said that the strength of a society is not the governmental plan that the president has. It's not the form of government. The strength of any society is on what Confucius called familial piety, the love and respect within the family. Confucius says that, you know, the important relationships are father, son, mother, daughter. That's the one, and a society is ultimately built upon what the quality of those relationships is. And I think that if the 8 of us kids because we're all largely, I'd say, stable, successful. If we look back at the lines of cause and effect that have led us to have the beneficence of what we have, the breaks we got, the education we got, the smart moves we made, it would all filter back to a mother who cared about us and loved us in her own way, and never left the post of duty, like the compass needle to the pole. Camilla would be in the kitchen, and all those neck aches that she had and the arthritis in her hands in later years was because of slaving over a stove. For what? For us. For us. For us. Camilla means self-sacrificing. And so Camilla was called to her final sacrifice recently. The family was trying to get her to think about heaven. Carol read the book to her, 90 Minutes in Heaven. It's a good book. You should look at that sometime. And Carol read it to her, and she was saying, I don't want any more of that book, because it's sort of like talking about getting her to think about heaven means you're going to die, Mom, and you know the stages of dying. That's a stage that people have to come to face their own death. And Mom was sort of resisting, partly because we said all your friends are going to be there in heaven, and the recluse that she was, being raised in the mountains and petting the bumblebees, she didn't want a room full of people, you know. And so I thought Carol was going to tell you the story about the monastery. To say long story short, she had a vision of a monastery her last few days on this earth. And it made me feel so good, because I knew that, you know, we were telling her about this heaven with people, but God was showing her a heaven with a monastery, in a place where she could have this quiet part of heaven. And so the final sacrifice that Camilla was called to make was the surrender that God calls all of us to make, surrendering to Him. Surrendering to Him. And you know, a lot of people fight, and they're on their deathbed, and they just keep fighting. And Lynn visited her so much and talked with her so much, and Lynn says the last 2 times that she visited her, there was a peace over her that you know wasn't usually there. And then this vision of the monastery. And so I think that Camilla made the final sacrifice. She surrendered herself to God, and that's what we all need to do, so let her be our example in that, as in all these other things.
Thank you.